Hello, happy Friday, and welcome to the Wormhole 2.0, the Organic Wormhole 2.0. Mr. Smiley's Gardens, Medically Fit, the Pharmacy Seed Network, Carlton. How you fellas doing this week?
Doing good, man. Doing good.
Freeze my fucking ass off this week.
Well, I at least had some 50-degree temperatures in the middle of these two cold spells that we've had. So not too bad. Not too bad.
Anyway, it's warm inside, and we got a hot tub now, so warm up nice and get in.
Woo.
That would feel good.
Makes it nice. That makes it nice. So, what are we talking about this week? What's the fun stuff?
Well, I think
Where you?
talk about calcium and nitrogen, I think is what we're all kind of discussing in the background prior to the stream here.
Different sources of calcium, because there's many different sources out there. That was some of it. Some of it was like the actual water holding capacity of soil. Because a lot of people don't really understand that when soil is moist, you're looking like almost like a cake-like moisture, not real dry, but not wet, where you can squeeze it in your in your hand and it kind of still stays in a ball and it doesn't just kind of break up. So there's a lot to really discuss this evening. And we'll hopefully get through some of what we've been trying to talk about.
Sounds like a great topic for this evening. For sure. You guys always seem to come up with some amazing stuff to talk about for show. So
So much, so much.
where we want to kick this thing off? Who wants to kick it off?
Well, what about sources of nitrogen? I mean, or calcium? Because, like, I'm an organic grower, and there's many different types and sources of calcium that I could use when feeding my plants. Besides oyster shell, you have eggshell extracts, you have gypsum, dolomite, lime. Um, what are some of the other ones you guys know of?
Well, there's crab shell and oyster shell type stuff. Personally, one I really like, not as like a soil amendment, but as a foliar feed when I have soil issues and I think I need extra calcium, nitrogen, and that is one from Advancing Eco Agriculture called Sea Shield. It's a oyster shell, crab shell extract with something else in it, and you get a little bit of nitrogen with it, but you also get the calcium. And let's just not forget how important calcium is for cell building. We don't want excess nitrogen. We want balanced nitrogen and calcium. So I'll put it back to you.
Eagle, go ahead.
With bone meal and fish bone meal and
What's some of the stuff from rooted leaf that Nick creates with the ferments for calcium? I'm trying to remember what some of them are, and I can't. Eagle, do you remember?
I do not. I haven't watched a lot of Nick stuff, to be honest with you. So,
I'm not familiar either, unfortunately.
But there's several different products out there for down to like calcium sources when making either super soil or amendment tea. Um, if you like, we talk about trying to front end load with calcium and trying to make sure we have enough calcium because it comes back to cation uptake with a lot of this, with how it takes up nutrients. And so each form is different and they work differently. Like oyster shell may take a couple weeks to a month or longer to break down before it becomes available
In the soil, yes.
in the soil. So if I'm trying to use it in an amendment tea, it's not going to break down and have any solubility for me to use it as a tea source. But if I'm using gypsum, that's a lot more solubility to it. So I'm able to make it into a tea and do a quick feed to my plants when I'm looking for a source of calcium.
Can we compare those two quickly too? Because like gypsum from a chemical standpoint will over time in water yield sulfur, calcium, its constituents, right? Whereas the oyster shell stuff is a much slower process without biology or enzymes present for that to be broken down and made usable to plants. So we got to remember that biological part of that process of making calcium and nitrogen available.
Well, what is oyster shell? It's calcium carbonate.
Yes.
It's going to take a while for that carbonate to be broke down by the biology. It's a hard shell. It's going to take something to really break down using enzymes and acids like the bacteria and fungus to really get into breaking that and making it available. Versus gypsum or dolomite mine, I can get it wet and it starts to break down and become soluble and releasing nitrogen, magnesium, or sulfur.
Yeah, that's what I tended to use was I got a micronized gypsum, so it's more water soluble, so you can meter in a teaspoon or here or there. Um, I I like that as a water in just because I think the soil I'm using might be a little heavy in the compost side, which would probably tend to lean towards like a potassium heavy. It's my thought. So I'm trying to meter in or water in sources of calcium. But I do like a washed like what do they call it, the bone meal. But there's different types of the bone meal where it's like really steamed or whatever. They really come out looking a lot more white, I guess. So I prefer that type of it. But I know a lot of people are cringe with it because of the source being at the butcher plant or the beef factories. But to me, it's just really worked well. So it's hard.
Well, you have steam bone meal, fish bone meal. You have several different types of bone meal that actually work for good calcium.
Yeah, I found that the steam bone meal that I've been I think it is the down to earth one. I get it in a bigger bag or whatever, but that stuff works really well as far as the long term source, and then meter and then like gypsum on top to kind of balance it as far as having two different sources. The fishbone meal I do like, but yeah, I mean I do like that too.
So as far as calcium goes, what about the eggshells? I mean,
I was just getting ready to talk about that. So eggshells, there's mixed information coming out real recently. They're saying that eggshells don't actually give you enough calcium breaking down, and it takes so long to break down in your soil to release the calcium because it is a calcium carbonate type substance. But people that do the calcium soluble extract using vinegar, apple cider vinegar, for some reason, the vinegar is creating a reaction with the eggshell and causing a lot of CO2 gaseous release, which is helping almost break down the eggshell and supposedly releasing calcium from the eggshell. And that's why a lot of people do it. I do it quite a bit. And when I actually feed my plants this eggshell extract and it still smells like apple cider vinegar just a little, I'm getting great results from it. So I can't really say that it's not benefiting my plants.
One of the things I read in one of the forums years back, one of the guys was talking about carbon sources and how important that actually is to plant growth. And it's something I've rediscovered in regenerative agriculture and studying that closer, especially regarding humates, humans, and all those carbonate compounds. And I think vinegar was one of the things he was talking about. I think he was using it even in hydroponics as a carbon source. So that may be part of it. It may be the carbon source that balances out the calcium and the other parts of it. Just a thought.
So what is an appropriate amount of calcium in the soil?
That's something I haven't really had a good information on the right amount, because if you listen to like John Kempf and some of the other people like that, they're like, you could almost pound the soil biology with calcium, and you're going to get great responses. And I haven't really heard of a calcium toxicity happening from applying a lot of calcium.
Let me throw a caveat on that because I have a little experience with that actually. When I first heard John Kempf talking about switching calcium in place of nitrogen primarily for vegetative plant growth, one, I was inspired. Two, his logic and science made sense. He talked about building cell walls out of calcium like you would anything out of concrete. You pour a hard foundation, now you have a strong cell wall that lasts, right? I was like, yeah, awesome. So I started using more calcium and less nitrogen. And I think I went way too little nitrogen on my cannabis plants. But it did start to see some stunting and some weird stuff. And some plants would try to go to flower early. It definitely messed up their senescence, part of the senescence cycle, or that, biological life cycle. But I think if you get that balance right, the calcium and nitrogen, and you have the biology to help keep that process facilitating all directions, keeping those pieces functioning, then I think that works really well. So I just wanted to comment on that. I'll go back to
I would. I'm not. I've always been a cocoa grower, mainly artificial nutrients. So I've always been supplying some type of calcium, CalMag, some way, shape, or form. In the latter years, not so much, because a lot of the nutrient programs that are out there are already supplementing it into their program. So it on its own wasn't necessarily, something I'm reaching for these days, unless I have one or two plants are necessarily calling for it. One thing I've always done though is a little bit of Epsom salt, a little bit of molasses in there. Now that's your cal mag. There's a little bit of mag in the Epsom salt, and the cal's coming from my molasses there. So there's a little bit, constantly on top of what's in the nutrient program already. But to answer your to add on to your question, Smiley, I'm asking what all is in the soil that is using calcium other than your plant. And I guess that answer would also come to what state is your soil in? You know what I mean? How living organic is your soil? And for that number, or are you just barely pumping along and you're worried about the plant's need for calcium? So what else is in the soil that is actually hungry and has an appetite for that calcium that we should figure into what we need, I guess.
Every bit of the life that I know of. I mean, all the cells of any bacteria, any of the higher predators, nematodes, protozoa, all of them need calcium. So, and that's the beauty of like the soil food web, is it's all established from the same stuff essentially that they need for life.
So I mean that makes me. So how do you put a number on everything?
Well, Albrecht is kind of the measure that I've always heard, and it's like that in that 65 to 75% calcium range as far as like the cation exchange capacity or whatever's on that test. But that percentage is what a lot of people will go by as that Albrecht. But it's kind of eye-opening when you think about it, but that's almost, you know what I mean? What is that? 2/3 to 3/4 of the available nutrients in the soil needs to be a calcium, It's kind of like different than what, a lot of people think, but it's one of the major sources of what inputs should be there in an organic sense, or what, according to what Albrecht had found in his work he studied. He's a famous agronomist. But there's also percentages for what magnesium you want, what potassium you want, and all of that's kind of worked into his schedule. So there is importance to them all, but there's also what he found was a balance to it for all the healthier plant to be. So That was my understanding of his work, basically. And I think the story goes is he noticed his cows were trying to reach over the fence to like a neighbor's pasture or something, and even though they had grass in their pasture, they were still trying to eat out of this other pasture that they couldn't get to. And it led them to wonder why, because they had a food source. They didn't have to try, but it turned out that was that grass that was on the outside there was a lot healthier source of food for them than the pasture grass. And somehow these cows just knew what the better grass was to eat, and they were going to try to eat it. And that apparently is what led them to study, well, why is this grass healthier than this grass? It's both grass, you know what I mean? And to him, they look the same or whatever. And they started figuring out that there was a different mixture of nutrients in the soil and different shit going on in the soil that made one grass healthier than the other grass, you know. So it's pretty interesting, just the observation that led him down that path. But now a lot of people hold to that, his work and kind of the guidelines that he puts out for nutrients.
And to extend that thought a little further, when you look into animal nutrition, they talk about cribbing. Cribbing is where the animals chew on their stall and they chew on the wood around them and everything around them. And that's when they have nutritional deficiencies, they start doing cribbing. You get the nutritional deficiencies corrected, they stop doing that. And so that ties again back to that. And I can tie back to that again because some of the plants I put out right near a horse pasture here this last summer, and they're getting foliar feeds, trace mineral nutrition, drenches, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sitting down here at night smoking a cigarette out back, listening, and the horse and the donkey are down there every night. And I hear them down there stirring around. They never go in the back before I came here. They wouldn't go near the back. Now I hear them down there every night. And I look over the next day when I'm out there, they've been chewing all around the fence where the overflow from the foliar feeds and been feeding all the grasses. They're down there getting all those trace mineral nutrition, high nutrient grasses. And speaking of calcium, this chart behind me is a tomato crop I did a nutrient density test on, a plant sap analysis test on. And going back to that point, it's really about balancing all of the minerals correctly. And calcium is one you need in a macro amount. So I'll put it back to you guys for further discussion.
It got quiet. Are you Eagle? You're muted.
Thanks. I do it out of respect. The dogs were barking in the background. So we've kind of talked a little bit about making it more like a readable sources of calcium and whatnot, but how can you bank it ahead? I mean, can we go ahead and put those eggshells in there for future use? I mean, how can we keep the cycle going and functioning properly?
Well, when it comes to composting, that's one place that you're going to be able to work calcium in a lot more efficiently versus doing your soil. And this is kind of how I believe. Like, I can throw chicken bones in, I can throw eggshells in, I can throw nutrient dense food in that's going to have sources of calcium. I can dump because I talk a lot about using milk, whole milk. Milk's full of calcium. Farmers used to dump raw organic milk on their fields and see all these increases. So
Also,
right. So I'll dump even that on my compost pile or my soil, my living beds over time. So I think it's easier to let the biology break things down. So front loading, if I'm doing a super soil mix, I'm loading a little heavier on the calcium sources. I'm really adding that oyster shell because it's going to take that 35 plus days or longer to break down. The gypsum, the dolomite lime, it's going to break down a lot sooner and become more available. So if I'm loading a little bit more of that in my beginning of the soil, it should help sustain my plants longer. And that's why I talk about using different sources and just not one source that way, because all sources kind of break down not so evenly. They all break down different times. It's kind of like
Diversity always.
Well, when it comes to nitrogen, it's kind of similar to blood meal versus feather meal. Blood meal's quick reacting. Feather meal takes a long time to break down and become a nitrogen source. Kind of that's why I say use eggshells and oyster shell, calcium carbonate sources versus gypsum and dolomite lime when you're making your soils. So you can make sure that you're not burning through all that calcium from the gypsum and lime right away, but it's lasting longer using these other sources.
And you're synergistically stacking both short-term and long-term available sources from multiple sources that multiple different types of bacterial and fungal communities can access. So you're stack in your favor.
What are other signs that we can look for other than when it's too late, that when our plants are showing signs? What are other signs we can look for in the soil that are letting us know that it might be getting low on calcium?
Well, the question is, do you understand the deficiency you're looking for in your plant to show calcium deficiency? Because a lot of people don't really understand what calcium deficiency is. It's hard to really diagnose versus lack of nitrogen or nitrogen toxicity. When you start becoming magnesium deficient, you get a lot more symptoms showing in your leaves for other deficiencies and not so much calcium. So it's, to me, almost one of the harder ones to diagnose. And that's why a lot of people just automatically start dumping calcium into their soil. How do you feel, Smiley?
Typically I'll see like growth, stunting growth, and also they can develop like spots on leaves in an extreme case. But definitely the idea of like keeping to that Albrecht is a percentage. So it goes like even basically it's going to matter what the cation exchange capacity is of the soil. And that's going to dictate kind of how the volume of what the whole nutrient package that the soil can hold, so to speak. And then when you're taking them, Albrecht is a percentage of what that is. So the thought that that's going to be 2/3 to 3/4 of that in those guidelines, it kind of, you kind of want to stack some weight into that as far as it goes, but this also is dependent on, establishing, good biology, a good working soil food web in order to cycle those nutrients. So all that work has to be done, and you can speed some of that up, like what you were getting at with doing it during composting or whatever. But in order to get some of those raw ingredients to break down, you need a good functioning soil food web. So it's still going to come back to having a proper, amount of soil structure to hold that food web, the amount of food there for the soil food web to sustain it. Like Eagle's saying, it's not just the plant trying to take in the nutrients like that. So they do pass it around, as things get consumed and get shit out or whatever, it all kind of gets passed around in that sense. But to have that idea as far as if you were measuring it, it might put your mind's eye on like, what your plant's really trying to draw out of the soil and to have sustainable, healthy growth.
So my next question,
it's a different take on what everybody's thought of with NPK all the time, right? Like calcium's never been included in that, and that's been, this NPK number has been the whole fucking gig since I've ever thought it. You know what I mean? Looked at fertilizer or whatever, and then now it's like on this organic side, you start looking at things and you're like, well, calcium's a huge input. You know what I mean? And when I was always looking at NPK, it really should be, you're looking at what the calcium percentage is. So, and even products that claim to have calcium, there's a percentage that needs to be for the plant. That's what the plant is looking for. There's a percentage of calcium and magnesium. So even like some of these cow mags, they have it out of whack a little bit. you know, I mean, it might be like a 3-to-1 calcium to magnesium, where it needs to be like a 6-to-1. You know what I'm saying? And like, and then they have the nitrate in the mix with it too. So now all of a sudden you have these different variables that are coming in when you're trying to add calcium, but you're also getting these other things. So there's a lot that plays a role in what's going on. But in the mind's eye, I think of it like in that picture of how it was. And when I was doing soil testing, there was quite a heavy demand back into the input of the soil. There was more of a demand into the calcium inputs and stuff like that than there was into like necessarily the nitrogen type inputs of like, you know, I was trying to get plant-based, so like soybean meal and alfalfa meal, you know what I mean, and just trying to shift away from some of the fish ones. I was using fish meal and some of those things too. But.
So now it goes back to the question of kind of getting into the next topic, but still as part of the calcium. Water capacity. Does water make a difference in your calcium uptake? And if it's too dry, does it make a difference in the amount of nutrients being uptaken?
Mobility and uptake, absolutely, 100%, very directly related.
So if I'm growing in cocoa and I let my pots dry out, am I actually getting the calcium I need? Or is it vice versa? Like if my pots are dry, I'm actually doing better uptaking calcium versus living soil, where the point is we want it kind of like cake-like moisture right in the middle. We don't want it too wet and we don't want it too dry, because we got to keep that balance. So, I mean, you guys, how would you describe it then?
It is dependent on how much water the plant moves. It's part of that bulk flow of the plant. So that's my understanding of it. That's why a lot of people are focused on like BPD and certain things of how the plant's transpiring into the environment. And that's the idea, is that can help dictate some of how the calcium's flowing into the plant. So a lot of that does play a role in it. You can't just necessarily like, oh, I'm gonna like the whole. I mean, I'm not even trying to sound like a dick or be controversial, but the whole idea of like saying something like, I'm gonna front load calcium, to me just seems like, you know, you want to have a maintained amount of calcium. You know what I mean? Like you're not necessarily trying to hit a front amount or anything like that. You're trying to maintain a certain available amount. But there's two ways to look at it. There's what's water soluble and what's available, and what's the saturated paste side. And then there's the view of like what is totally there on the what's called the Malick 3 test. And that's breaking everything down with, you know, a pH of 3 and seeing what's there, is my thought understanding on that. And then that's where you're really looking at what percentages you're trying to have for that Albrecht thing. And there is kind of a balance of how that's going to become soluble to the plant, because on that saturated paste side is more what the plant is going to see available to the roots, is how I understand that. So, but that translation from what's there totally is what you're talking about. Are these, okay, we got oyster shell, we got all these amendments that are going to take a while to break down, right? So they may not show up on that saturated paste, and they might not be there right away. But the idea that they're there as a food source, a long-term food source, it helps establish the biology, helps establish the soil food web, and those things start to cycle a lot faster. And it really is going to depend on how fast you can cycle those nutrients versus how much you can maintain that's water soluble yourself, right? So like I can supplement my plants with that water soluble calcium or gypsum or whatever, right? And I can supplement with that, but it's still going to need to have an establishment for the biology to form and build on. It's still going to have that base that's there for the biology to. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? That's why you want to mix it up. You want to have the long term. You want to have what's available. But the idea is that the biology is going to cycle that stuff into available. You know what I mean? The whole term, right?
Yeah.
So, so really what it comes down to is how fast is your soil going to cycle that nutrients for the plants to become available. So it's back to the soil food web. You have to have a, you know, and I'm not a pro at that. It's difficult, and it's very difficult to try to balance. It's very difficult when we were doing the I was sending in soil samples and working with Scott and Sarah at Custis. They were, I mean, just the direction that they could tell from the samples that I sent in and some of the things that were going on. It was pretty amazing what they could tell just by looking at it under a microscope. And the direction that they were always turning me was away from maintaining. I was always maintaining the too moist of the soil, where I had to come to the drier side. And a lot of it was also about, you know, trying to bring in moisture to the top part of the surface of the soil and actually having that mulch layer there so that it's more, the biology is more able to cycle and access the top dressing and the nutrients and all the stuff that's going on there. But there was a lot of it was about controlling the moisture in the soil. There was a specific range that was very difficult to maintain. But you know, on the too dry side, you started losing on the biology, and they could legit tell that on that next microscope thing that I sent in. They'd be like, "Oh man, now you swung the other way. Now you're running too dry." Like there were different. It was pretty eye opening, but how difficult that is to maintain. But just how do you get to that window without actually putting it under the scope and looking and seeing? And
So
it's tough to dial it in. Man.
it's real easy for people to overwater. It's real easy. People don't understand that. I get a lot of people asking me, you know, like some of the problems, what's going on with their plants. And the first thing I ask them is, how often are you watering? Oh, I water every day and I water this amount and blah, blah, blah. You don't need to do that. Like, you're causing a problem because you are literally watering every day. You do not need to do that. If you are in a flood and drain table, most of them will do it, but not in soil. Soil is not the same as cocoa. It doesn't dry out as fast.
Well, so there's that oxygen holding capability of the media is different. And there's, you know, cocoa can tend to hold some enough, well, what's considered enough by people, moist oxygen in that environment. So yeah, in the soil where you're trying to do the biology, it's a whole different ballgame. And for me, the whole thing is to really have the eye opener and to think that the roots are trying to breathe just like you and me are. So like, if you're really waterboarding them with water and they're really heavy with that, it's going to be tough for them to breathe. It's going to be tough for them to grow, function. So that's, I don't know. It still is one of the, in my opinion, watering. I know it's the easiest fucking thing to do, but it's also the hardest fucking thing to do. And I don't know how else to say it, but it's like,
it's easy to put
one
on.
of the paradoxes, man. It's the easiest, but it's also the hardest.
It's easy to put on. It's hard to do at the right time and the right amount.
Well, a lot of people, when they're watering, it's two things: hand watering or through machines. Hand watering is kind of difficult to me because I can go in and I can use buckets or different pour spouts and water the top, give it some time to go in. But if my soil is dry around the edges from air pots, it will just fucking run through it. And it's like, okay, well, it's too dry now. How do I get the water to start being absorbable? And that's where, like, if you water slow and give it time, like a little bit here, let it absorb in, a little bit here, you know, like instead of dumping a whole gallon at one time, there's a difference in the watering methods and how your soil will actually absorb water over a slower rate than a fast rate. And like out in Mother Nature, when you live in certain parts of the country and you get a quick downpour, like I live in the desert. So if I get a good heavy downpour, it's gone. It doesn't even absorb down past an inch in the soil because there's not enough time there for the the soil to actually absorb it. But if I was back in Iowa and had good topsoil, a 1-inch rain, my soil would gladly take it up slowly, but absorb the water and the moisture instead of running off because it's so dry underneath, it doesn't want to penetrate. So that's kind of some of the issues I found, even watering with like fabric pots versus plastic pots. My fabric pots, I dry out a little faster than my plastic pots. And so just understanding the difference in my soil medium and the type of pot I'm using is going to make a difference on how often I water, how much I water. Because sometimes my plants, they won't want to take up water. Like literally, I've watered them, especially in veg time. There's times that I'll go back 3 days later and my pots are still heavy. The atmosphere, the environment change from dew point pressures or something that caused them not to uptake the water as much. So that's why, like, we're really trying to get people to understand watering is kind of difficult. You may think it's not, but that's one of the easiest problems that people cause for themselves is over watering.
It does complicate things, especially with soil. Not so much with cocoa. I mean, cocoa, man, I had my shit 10 gallon pots every 3 days. Every 3 days. Yeah, it need to be water. They could go without just fine. But soil isn't that every 3 days thing, like you're saying. That doesn't work 100%. And when I talk to you guys more and more about the organics, you guys make it harder and harder to figure that shit out, to be honest with you, to be honest. Because I've asked you guys, does plot size, does that help me control the moisture? Not really. Makes it harder. Best way to control in a bed. Well, that seems like it makes it harder. You know what I mean? But it's easier yet. You know what I mean? So, it's to listen to you guys like try and talk about dialing in that sweet spot in the soil. It does sound, and from my experience, I like to put my hands into the soil, to be honest with you. There is no picking up the pots for me with soil. My hands go right into the fucking dirt as far as I put my fingertips. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's, make my choice from that. But, it's not a repetitive now system. It's more hands-on, and it isn't, it's not an easy system to get a rhythm into. There's a lot of variables when it comes to soil, 100%.
Well, and that's why they say, honestly, growing living organics is the hardest growing method there is, because there's so much that you're changing with changing the water, the nutrients. If I change a feed by, this amount, it's going to change my outcome of what my profile and my expression is. Like, that's why it's so hard, and you get a lot of people that fail trying living soil because one, they're overthinking it. They're trying to apply too much stuff at one time. Keep it simple. Make a small super soil recipe and just water every few days.
No,
Go ahead.
I'm curious now. I've heard you guys talk about the blue mat, things. How far actually are them things actually measuring? You know what I mean? The soil moisture. I mean, is it only the first couple inches? Is it 6 inches? I mean, how accurate is it? Are those things for the pot? I mean, when it comes to them things, is it now a matter of how many you need to put into a pot for accurate, accuracy? Is there a depth? Do they make them longer for different pots? I mean, how hard is it to even dial in with automated stuff? You know what I mean?
The blue mott carrots it's a ceramic, and just like my little chia, I got a little chia pet thing that I fill with water, and it's just clay ceramic, just similar to that. So the water can transfuse through it. But basically what it has is a mechanism at the top that's operated so as the water goes out of the center cavity of the blue mont, it causes a vacuum to pull open the switch for the water dripper. It's a very basic mechanical setup, but it depends on how moist the soil is when you set it. And then it depends on how deep you want to put that carrot or the ceramic. But they do have different length ones. I think the longer was better, and that having a short one in a big pot didn't do me much good. But those, they work well when you dial them in, but it's just a matter of dialing them in.
Well, there are problems with them, so don't forget to include that, because they can get buildup from different, like if people try to feed teas through it, they can get buildup. You'll need to clean the parts. Sometimes the parts will fail and your water will continue to run, and it will cause it to pretty much overwater your soil. So even with any mechanical devices that you're watering with, it is a must. You constantly keep looking and observing it to make sure it's functioning properly, because there's going to be that one day that you're like, oh, it's been fine. I can get it to it tomorrow, and you fucking come back tomorrow and everything's flooded. And you're like, what the fuck? I thought it was fine.
So
Shit.
that's one of the problems. Yeah. So if you adjust the valves and the carrot, if the center part of the carrot moves out enough water in time, it won't be able to, it'll turn on the valve, which there's a line that it basically pinches, basically is how it operates. But it'll allow that to open, and then it doesn't allow it, it won't have enough to close it again, because that as that moisture comes back on the ceramic, it pushes back up and closes the mechanism. So it's kind of a interesting design, but there are flaws to it and there are downfalls to it. It's not perfect.
Well,
I always found you'd have to change the water in them too over time. I'd have to swap out each one of the carrots. So I had a bucket that I'd keep, and I'd just get all the air out of it and put that in, pull the next one. You know what I mean?
well, it's just like your emitters in your garden or your flower beds. Low emitters over time are going to get like a calcium or some type of I would call it a crystalline deposit, not necessarily all calcium. It could be other chemicals causing the buildup. But that's why we have to, when we're using this stuff, we literally need to use like some type of cleaning agent to rinse and clean that stuff out to keep it functional, or have replacement parts available.
The only water hitting the inside of that carrot is what you originally fill in it. And other than that, there's your actual water supply is a hose that goes through the cap of that. And then there's a little adjustment. You screw it down on the cap. On that
Yeah, it's the same thing with emitters.
A little 3mm hose that gets squished down, and then you attach that to a different, soaker hose or whatever you want. But the actual carrot's controlled that way.
At the end of the day, though, that all those points bring us back to water quality, don't they? Because if you had clean water going in, you wouldn't have clogged emitters.
Well, and that makes me question too. I mean, how much of that is being clogged by actual life, microbial life of some point, sneaking into the holes and clogging them up? Is that part of the process? And my next question added on to that is a constant water source or like that, inviting, pathogens and stuff like that. Are they sitting sources of problems?
I think that's a yes, because I know with drip lines on farming scale stuff, we have roots infiltrate into the drip lines. And so end of the season, when you pull those drip lines up, you'll find where the plant's roots went into the little drip emitter in the line, went into the line and started spreading roots and climbing up the line, especially if you do fertigation through it. So if you put any kind of nutrition through it, that really accelerates that. So, pardon me. But I would say, yeah, I would say those are concerns. And maybe it's about changing how we water, right? Maybe we have something similar to that, but we water from overhead more evenly. And to all those points about that moisture distribution. That is so important. I just did a video. I talked about that, and I did a demonstration where I did two holy basil plantings side by side. One where their watering wasn't quite even right, and you could see some weird wilting in different spots. And then after I corrected the water problem, you could see the plants are back perked up and healthy again. So that's my 2 cents on it. Sorry, I'm chewing on chocolate.
I can't help but wonder too, is we talk about all this stuff, is a lot of we're growing a product, or we're trying to go shoot for a singular plant here versus, having a diverse environment. By doing so, is that part of the struggle that we face, a lot of growers face with the organics? Because now we're worried about pH singular to this plant. We're talking about a moisture that we want that it's only going to benefit this plant. You know what I mean? By doing so, do we fuck up and disrupt everything that we're trying to talk about to keep in balance? You know what I mean? Because the cannabis plant is the end all. You know what I mean? Are we purposely sabotaging ourselves, by pushing, you know what I mean, the one plant, or worrying about the one plant or everything it needs?
Well,
Soil, proper soil.
Let's look at this other topic that we talked about in the background that kind of fits this scenario right here. All of us are growing the same clone. Each have 4 different environments. Each water different, each feeds different nutrients, right? When we come to harvest time and go to smoke each of our flowers, all 4 are going to be a little different. End of story. They're not going to have the same profile. They may smell similar, but they're not the same.
I say it all the time on my channel. Environment dictates gene expression, period.
So, Eagle, if you're growing Blue Dream and I'm growing Blue Dream, and I do a little different nutrient feeding than you do, and then we go to compare them later, it doesn't matter how much water we used or how much nutrients, the profile is still going to be different. And that's where a lot of people are like, well, I'm growing Blue Dream and it don't taste the same as what that one did. Well, and people don't understand why. Watering and nutrients and calcium, this all plays effect in genetic expression and what we're getting out of our plants. And when we're changing any bit of this, the expression will change. So literally, if you say you ran Blue Dream 3 runs in a row, and you change the watering one time, you change the nutrients one time, and the last one, you just, you change everything up. All 3 are going to come out tasting differently. Even the flower structure might be different because of the expression happening.
I can actually give you some experience to that, to be honest with you. Now, the last grow prior to, this little bit of shit I have go here, I spent 6 years in that grow. When I come in, it was somewhat a cement floor, worried about the cement floor, come in, put down fatigue mats everywhere to kind of help myself being in the room and kind of insulate the floor from the colder temperatures during, the colder months. And they stayed there probably 4 years. And everything fine, great. Every strain, like you're talking about, I got used to that environment, everything great. And then I got tired of cleaning them fucking fatigue mats. Decided to pull them up, make things, a little bit easier to clean. And actually, it was during the summer too, hot summer. And I figured, revealing this floor is going to help, release a little bit of cooler temperatures, as well. And I did notice things, kind of go astray there. Now, this is when the enter kind of the show and the quest for the pine come into play. Now, I wanted to bring back, or I wanted some pine. So I was talking about it on the show, and People sent me some, pine-based strains, and Jack Greenstock sent me the J2 from California. And oh yeah, pine, 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 pine. Well, I get it in my garden, and I couldn't get anything pine to express what I would call pine. And this is where the dragon fruit comes in. Anything that I noted that was supposedly a pine strain kind of to me leaned towards like a dragon fruit, or like, you know what I mean? That's what I called it. Nothing pine. Okay. And it was through a conversation I had one night with Mr. Toad, and I told him about what happened. And in that room, there was a fucking 12-inch floor drain that I never considered, that had always been covered with a fatigue mat that was revealed when I pulled them. And Toad was picked that out in my conversation. He's like, man, does it smell a little bit different in there? And I'm like, yeah, a little. And whatever was off gassing out of that drain, I still believe to this day was an environmental pressure that wouldn't have let that plant express that in particular terpene profile. It made that plant express what
it's kicking out dragon fruit terps.
And actually, from then on, the flower was good, but I noticed a sway across the board. You know what I mean? But to this day, I insist that it was that floor drain. Whatever was off gassing out of that floor drain was enough of a pressure to change.
So that could have been a few things. It could have been methane from the shit. It could have been high excessive CO2. It could have been even radon gas coming up out of there. And not a lot of people think about, when they're growing in their basements, about radon gas. And it's a big concern growing, just living in a house that has a basement, because of all this radon gas that comes up through the ground.
And another one I wonder about with that is, did that change the air temperature coming in? Did it make colder air and keep cold plant feet? Because I've had that problem in the greenhouse. That was something I struggled with all the time, trying to keep feet warm. I finally put a thermal mass circulation hydronic heat system under the plant bed to warm the feet of the plants. So I just wonder if that might have been a factor as well. But yeah, interesting about how that affected the expression dramatically.
That instance right there led me to kind of ponder about the future and them. And I've talked a little bit about that jokingly, kind of. I can really see at some point them automating a room and say the terpene profile that you're looking for, they will have a gas recipe or a terpene, because just like a companion plant or whatever, I believe like them, as well as keeping out pests or whatever, your plant will work against them terps. If that plant that it's right next to is out terping your cannabis plant is naturally going to try to out terp the plant next to it. So I think those two, the pressures. So, okay, with that in mind, scientists will come up with, okay, you're looking for this type of terpene profile. We need to shoot this into the room. This amount of gas, this pressure, it will bring out exactly dripping, you know what I mean? Your plant with that terpene profile that what you're looking for in a sealed room.
So let's look at this. What are terpenes? Terpenes are basically secondary metabolites. The plant's secondary are like a defense system. So if your plants weren't really producing much secondary metabolites, terpene profile, could you possibly say that your plant wasn't stressed out enough to produce the volatile compounds it needed? It's a good question, because most of the time, living soil, we get better expression through like our terpenes and everything else because of the stressors and the living soil biology. So go ahead, Carl.
What I was going to say that we could probably do with that maybe it's probably not going to come down to what gas you can inject, although I could see a certain fraction of commercial side of things trying to go in that direction. I'll bet it's going to come down to environmental tuning, both temperature and nutrition and biology. And I'll bet you can tweak exactly what terpene profile you want. And I'll bet over time that even becomes a food based thing as well. And custom profile to companies. They pick what profile they want to sell and they have their producers sell that. The reason I say that is because right now what's being introduced, and we just did an episode of my channel last week with a man named Dan Kittredge, is a nutrient density testing meter, handheld. And right now they've got 10 crops indexed already. You can already shoot a laser at a carrot and see what its nutrient density and polyphenol profile is. And so it costs about $1 million a crop to do it. And I imagine in cannabis, it would probably cost you about $1 million a terpenoid profile. But the cannabis industry has the finance to do that. So I think that that's probably coming down the pipeline in the future. So it's interesting you bring that up. And there's lots more to discuss regarding that. And I'm actually going to be a part of that directly. So I'm really excited. And I'll be bringing all I learned back here to share with you guys because it's really cool.
That is cool. I know that there's different biology that stimulates different things in plants too. So as far as like the terpene expression, not all of it is considered exactly a stressor, where these can be beneficial endophytic ones.
Yeah.
I don't know any of the big names, but the biology in the soil food web is actually helping to stimulate a wider expression of the plant. It's a role in the environment. It's all part of that environment. Just like what food it's getting, how much water it's getting, all that stuff is considered part of the environment. So like, them genes are always expressing based on their environment.
Let me enhance that thought a little bit too. They found that, I know traditionally we all understand that plants produce higher terpenoid and essential oil profiles under stress, right? We know, like peppermint, for example, if you expose it to cold temperatures, it produces a higher percentage of terpenoid profile and essential oil. And they use that in the past for production to increase essential oils, to extract essential oils for a higher percentage yield. If you've ever grown for essential oil yield production, it takes a tremendous amount of plant material to get a very small amount of essential oil. And on the other end of that scale, if you enhance the trace mineral nutrition, you can 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100x fold that same effect that you would get with stressors, but by enhancing the trace mineral nutrition and biology and tuning it correctly to the species of the plant, to the environment it's in, to this, down to the infinitum. As far as you can tune it and enhance that, you can dramatically increase the amount. So
that's why I talk about using the full spectrum of nutrients and not just one or two or a couple of them. That's why I use a lot of the down to earth products, because there's so many that I'm giving my plant and the biology so many different sources to choose from of food and nutrition, micro, macro. Like, that's the biggest thing, is if we can create the plant to have the full, not just complete, but the essential nutrients too, that's where we're going to see a difference in the expression, the profiles, the flavonoids and terpenoids that are coming out of the plant. Like, when I first started growing hydro style growing, I wasn't getting the expressions out of the plants I get now. I wasn't getting the smells and the aromas. They were there. There's a hint, but it's not like, bam, you bust open the jar and you're like, wow, that's fucking loud, bro. I get that a lot more with living soil than I do and did with growing in hydro.
Some of that I can't help but think is the swing of things that's going on in the soil that makes things more available than guys like me that grow in more in cocoa, and we're trying to keep it more 662, where, we're kind of just hoping everything falls in line there. What kind of initially raised my eyebrow about the pH swing and it doing different things was I was at Home Depot and I was talking to one of the garden attendants about Jicabus plants and the color of how they get the color, and they had mentioned that they changed the color of the color of the flower by the pH of the plant. So whatever, you know what I mean? And I wondered if that we could play that same game with cannabis. You know what I mean? Through a higher swing of pH during a flushing period, if we could, make it more purple or whatever, because obviously it could be done. But I think through that swing that we're talking about, a little high here, a little low there, that it is, hitting the sweet spots that you guys are talking about in the end product, and because of that up and down, I think.
Can I comment on that quick while it's in my head?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're doing.
I just trying to break in. That part about the I forget what it was. Oh, was it rhododendron? It would be white, and then if you got the soil more acidic, it would turn blue for you, or even think red or purple you could get. Now, relating that to soil, John Kempf talks about how blueberry production, typically blueberries, you want to keep them in like a 5 pH range roughly, right? Because that's what makes available all the phosphorus, calcium, potassium in the right ratio against the other nutrients that you need for that plant. But what they found is you don't have to add acid to the soil to get there. If you get the biology present on that soil, it'll regulate the pH in the root zone of the plant. And yes, the soil pH will tend to average down lower toward that, but it doesn't have to be at the 5 pH range in order for a 5 pH range action to happen in the root zone. And this goes back to that comment that Smiley made specifically about how all those pieces have to be there. Remember, each of those biology pieces has its own range of pHs that it operates in. Let's just relate to that temporarily by relating to it, so something we all understand, our human body. From the point in our mouth, we should be around 7. The other end, I'm not sure, but in between, it goes as low as like 1.5 or 2 or even 1 pH. So we go through a wide range to accomplish a bunch of different biological processes along the way. So let's just keep that in perspective in this conversation, because it's systemic and it all relates to the other pieces.
Yeah, it makes me think a little bit. What is it? The anthocyanin that in the plant that produces the purple. Now you're bringing up blueberry as an example and liking a lower pH. Now, when I think about pH in general and temperature, pH tends to drop with temperature. You know what I mean? So, is that again a way to bring out purpling in a plant? Is that, even outside has, the simple temperature driven the pH in the soil down a little bit enough to where it's telling the plant, time to kick in, or you know what I mean? Is that again, are we just playing with pH and temperature, color? Are we talking like a high pH? Can we bring out, oranges or whatever? You know what I mean? Can we swing it the other way, brighter?
2012 and 2013, on one of the forums I was in, we did some cold testing trying to make plants that were more cold hardy, autos specifically. And we found that purple and red and those colors really express dramatically in colder temperatures. And we never did get down to drill down to whether that related to soil temperature and biological action, nutrient availability, or actual cold temperatures. But it is an intriguing question you put up.
I did notice in one of my greenhouses, knock it off, that my plants, when it hit like late September, early October, the greenhouse temperatures were getting down in the 20s. The plants that had the purpling to it did really well in colder temperatures than the plants that still had a lot more green to them. So something about the anthocyanins really help fight against cold temperatures and help your plants deal with it a lot better. And I'm not quite sure or been able to find what research it is that is the cause of this, but that's what I've noticed over the years just in cultivating. Anything outdoor, come late season, as it starts to purple, it is more hardier to colder temperatures than any plant that has a lot of green left to it.
And then go add one step further, put some like northern kelp seaweeds and that northern cold seaweed to it in the end of the season, and you'll see it's more resistant, and you'll see it express even more like THC and resin production. Something like sea stems, which is pretty cool thing just to try.
You know, that's something that funny that popped into my head. I didn't mean to cut you off, Smile. It looked like you're getting ready to say something. Fucking it, leading back to something I said a few minutes ago about like, are we the problem in being the singularity to the plant? Now we just like instantly talk about, yeah, if pH, if we change the pH a little bit, can we fuck the biology? Can we change the flower of the color or the color of the flower? You know what I mean? By spiking, I don't care if the microbes like it at 5. I want the flower, you know what I mean? And we're gonna just sabotage the whole thing for a little bit of color in the end, and we'll fix it in the beginning of the next one.
Well, that's some of the stuff we used to try to do at the end of flower is use cold water on our plants to get a purple expression. And that was one of the bro science things that we used to try to do a lot of, was use water temperatures about 50, 55 degrees, because it's supposed to mimic rain in the fall as it's cold.
Makes sense. I think there's a lot more to the bro science than I think it gets knocked a lot harder because at some of these things, you know, some things that do make good sense or that may be new and innovative are just things that, you know, we've done in our garden. We've done it for so long and it works well. We just go, I can't be the first one to think about this. So nobody documents it or starts writing it down shit. You know what I mean? It just becomes a habit. And then as we talk about it, we realize, oh, it's not so common knowledge. Maybe I should have took a couple of notes, you know what I mean, to back my shit up.
But it's all science, bro. It's all science, bro.
If you follow that conversation back around and check out episode 99 from Advancing Eco Agriculture, they talk about how epigenetics, the environment that corn is grown in, specifically affects the embryo for the next generation, and how that's been a big factor in the loss of nutrition and seed quality over many generations. Really intriguing conversation if you want to go a little deeper into it. Even if you're not really into genetics and stuff, it's really worth hearing to understand from like a 50,000-foot perspective.
So yeah, I was gonna say something on anthocyanins, but I remember when I was looking into it, there's it's like carotenoids, and I think anthocyanins are a type of carotenoid. But those, I remember that those were processing or metabolizing and actually releasing a lot more heat than what some of the other chlorophyll and different ones were. So they still were processing light, but it was coming out more in like a heat release. And I always thought of that as, well, that's interesting because that's the cold response to the plant. But if it's shifting its metabolism into kind of like producing a more of a heat source for itself, I mean, that makes sense, right? Is that how that was going? But that was the one thing I remembered when I was looking into like why those were expressed more. You know, like in fall in the trees, the plants are pulling the green, the chlorophyll and all that. They're pulling that because they can convert that back into different forms, stored in its trunk and its roots. And then like the colors that are expressed from those are the carotenoids in that leaf, and those are different form than whatever gets left behind. But that was the one thing I kind of remember. There's a difference, I think, in way the plant the cannabis plant that's growing and flowering is expressed in those versus how like a tree in the fall we see those expressed. Because I think they do tend to fade the chlorophyll a little bit, but I almost feel like it's just a heavier production of those when the plant's flowering and it's facing them cooler temperatures. And it's just my wild ass thoughts on it, I guess.
So the whole point is what we're trying to do is mimic Mother Nature, from the watering cycles, the lighting cycles, the air cycle, the nutrient cycling. That's what we're trying to do. So Operation Annihilation, that is the whole intention of using cold water in the end of flower, was to mimic Mother Nature in the cold rain. The senescence part of it happens for a couple reasons. Like a lot of people, when they harvest some of their flower, their leaves are still green. Too much nitrogen, too much photosynthesis still happening late in flower, and it shouldn't be like that. The senescence, the fading of the fall colors should be happening. That's a good indication that your plant is ripening and finishing. And that's kind of the same thing as using cold water. It's kind of tricking the plant, saying, hey, the rain is getting colder and the temperatures are getting colder. We need to finish up and start putting out the senescence and ripening faster. And that's kind of what you're trying to do in that sense with using cold water, using tricantanol from alfalfa. You're trying to get your plants to finish up faster, trying to mimic Mother Nature in a sense.
I think it's funny because a lot of people give Joe shit about that light schedule of the 12 and 1 and whatnot. And if you think about it, his light schedule is probably the closest thing to, nature's actual light schedule. You know what I mean? Again, and out in the wild, you show me other than the equatorial regions where the flowers get in 12 hours, 12, 12 constantly. You know what I mean? It's not, especially towards the fall. You know what I mean? As the flower itself kicks into cycle, the hours of daylight are what, down to 10 at that point, and then dropping, 6 minutes a day, 2 minutes a day, something like that, until harvest time. So we're actually getting under that every day. So,
Well, see,
why do people push so hard?
Some people, most people really don't know my actual flower lighting schedule. Even though it's 12 hours on, once every hour, my lights shut off for 15 minutes. So in that 12-hour time, 4 hours, 3 hours, I've literally reduced my time by reducing 15 minutes per hour.
And you are accumulating dark hormones on some level doing that, aren't you?
Well, as long as it's not over 15 minutes of dark period, the photosynthesis is still happening. The plant hasn't quite fallen asleep. But if I go over that time period, then the plant starts to kind of go inactive and you really fuck with it at that point. And that's why you don't want to really do more than 15 to 20 minutes at a time.
Let's drill into that for a second, because that's an excellent part of this whole process that we really should stay and focus on it on some perspective, because what you're talking about there is a 15-minute window where there's enough sugars in that plant still from photosynthesis for it to keep respirating, and it hasn't run out of sugars yet. So this all goes back to photosynthesis. Let's just remember that's the energy driver. Photons striking a light leaf surface, and photosynthesis happening. There's lots of little processes that support that. But at the end of the day, we're taking water in at the bottom of the plant. We're ionizing that water. We're sending out carbon dioxide, converting oxygen. We're converting energy and sugar out of it. So just keep that in the perspective of it.
But reducing the time during flower, because Mother Nature, mimicking once again, like Eagle's talking, from the summer equinox, at that point, we drop minutes daily. And if you really look, there's a map that you can Google. It tells you like what your hour is at certain times of the day and how many hours of sunlight you actually receive. And if you really look, most places get 14 to 16 hours. They don't get 18 to 21. So when you're even in flowering, look, we're reducing from 14 down to 12, down to 10, almost 9 hours of light by the time we're harvesting. And so when we're still running 12 hours, is it affecting the plant and the flower production? Because Mother Nature's doing it where she's using less light at the end of flower, where we're
Good
still
question
keeping.
for somebody named Medically Fit. Us as examples of the plant, because I don't think we're any different, to be honest, from the microbes to the nutrients we fucking need. We're very similar to that plant. Now, Medically Fit, as somebody with a name like Medically Fit, I think you can understand this. You're gonna go to the gym and you're gonna rip yourself for a couple of hours. Now, where's your benefit? Where's your gain? Where's your muscle gonna come from? It's gonna be from that recovery time, that downtime, that, you know what I mean? So why wouldn't that be any different in the plant to, rip it for a few hours and give it more time to build that muscle, that mass, yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what I'm saying? The same in the plant. So I don't, I do believe that the plant, there's more going on during that dark cycle than we give the plant credit for. You know what I mean? We always think everything's happening during that light cycle. And I think there's a little bit more going on during that night cycle than we give the plant credit for. Yeah.
Well, during the when the light's happening and photosynthesis is happening, there is a sugar source. There's a conversion into a sugar. That's the sugar source. That's the energy source into the plant. But then you shut that light source off, those cells convert and start to metabolize a separate way, and then they're consuming that sugar as well. So there's definitely a difference that happens, right, when you shut that light source off. But as those sugars, when they're getting formed during the day, they're getting consumed at night. When they're getting consumed, what's left behind are the carbon skeletons that help form the cell walls, help form all the building blocks of the whole plant. So the actual metabolism of that sugar is important as well. And from what I understood of it, to help build a new cell, help build a new part of the plant, help the plant grow, it has to be metabolized in that sugar that it had produced. So yeah, I mean, in a sense, that's going to happen when it stops having the light, right?
Well, like you said too, is there a point where the bank's full and the light should be shut off? Yeah, there's something it can no more store that valuable sugars that you're talking about, and it should go to sleep, start burning that off.
Well, Angel smiles. She said it very well. Humans heal our bodies when we're in a state of rest, when we're sleeping. That's when a lot of the repair and recovery is taking place. So if plants are real similar to us, if during their nighttime, is that when most of the recovery and like growth really happens? Because it seems like during the daytime, if I try to watch my plant grow, I don't see much growth. But if I turn off the light, come back 24 hours later, I see fucking growth.
And
So
John,
is it the night that's really helping the growth of the plant, using up all the energy that it got through the day, through the Krebs cycle, the ATP cycle, the photosynthesis cycle, and then when it goes to rest and it doesn't have to continue photosynthesis cycle, is that when we start seeing a lot more of the growth and the healing recovery of the plant?
and John Kempf talked about that. One of his talks about foliar feeds and environment and plant comfort. And he talks specifically about in the fall and spring when temperatures drop and that plants do most of their growth, like 80% of their growth, 50 to 80% of their growth between 4 and 8 in the morning. That's when the cell division part of the growth happens. And so if you're at 45 degrees on a tomato plant, you ain't growing nothing, even though you've collected energy all day the day before, because you're just not at a comfort zone for cell division.
I was kind of wondering too, real quick, about the purpling of the plant. Um, is that something like an energy wasted on color? Then you know what I mean? That could be dealt with some bit more beneficial in the way. I mean, a lot of times when I think of the more purple plants, I'm thinking, man, I'm not getting as high as I would. You know what I mean? Is it
But
because the
that
plants took in that good energy and fucking whatever chemicals it could be producing and is delegated now some of that energy into whatever producing heat? You know what I mean? The color versus
Well, I think that's like a misconception of purple plants. Mostly we know that they're not high in THC. They're more of a CBD, higher profile type of plant. But if you look at
Yeah.
Granddaddy Purple, GDP, when that goes into flower, that fucking darkens. It almost gets black. But every part of the plant that's not receiving light stays green. And so, well, is it then saying, oh, well, because the plant is purple, I'm not getting as high? Well, smoke some Granddaddy Purple. I bet you say you get high as fuck smoking that. And mostly it's, to me, the cannabinoid profile and purple plants are way different. It's not the same level as some of the THC green type flowers that we're used to, but I get a different type of high. I get a different type of body high when I smoke it. So I can't say that it's just the plant itself. Like I know they're producing different cannabinoids than most of your green flower cannabis.
Can I jump in on that for a sec? Yeah. You had a guy named Full Duplex on a while back.
remember.
Uh, he was another member of a forum I was on for a while, and a lot of the genetics that he got that have all those awesome dark, black, red, deep colors, those are all those really medicinal profiles. And so it goes back to, in part, the genetic material the plant originally comes from. And the other part that happens is when you change environment, that expression accelerates out more. Like those colors will show up on something that has that inherent in its genetics, right? So like if I take a blue corn and I try to get yellow corn out of it, I'm going to struggle like hell to do that. Same with the yellow corn to get a blue corn out of it. But if it has that inherent in it, and then I add the trace mineral nutrition to support that, then we can really express those genetics to the max. So I noticed one thing we noticed when we did some testing with that, the original breeder of those strains, Mossy, developed some stuff for her pain issues, and they were very high in myrcene. And if you look at myrcene, it's also very high in I think it's mangoes. And she found that mangoes and smoking and eating, all three of those stacked together, gave her a much better pain relief effect. So I just wanted to tie a bunch of those pieces together.
Well, when you look at mangoes and the actual profile, the myrcene that's in it, I mean, a lot of fruits have similar terpenes or flavonoid profiles as hops, as cannabis. And so when we look at the correlation, even different herbs have similar profiles. And so when we look at the medicinal uses of fruits and vegetables, mangoes, for example, why do you think people talk about, oh, when I smoke weed and I eat mangoes, I feel like I get higher? Well, some of it's that entourage effect from the myrcene causing you to feel that way. And it's just not in cannabis. When you eat other plants, fruits, herbs that are all higher in these other profiles, you're going to feel those different effects like lavender, lemon lewel, shit like that.
Yes, and you can enhance the expression of a cannabis by adding a fruit that supports that expression that you're after. Pick out a terpene you like and enhance it with a fruit from a terpene you like, especially a fruit grown in a high nutrient program and organic program that's really high in those polyphenols. Think about all the synergistic stacking here that's available from a user perspective.
So I terpenes are a big part of the organic process, you know. So is there a way that we can, naturally, again, gradedly push the terpenes of our plant, or should we be better off just doing better pheno selections than trying to change the fuel.
Well, you have 100 seeds that you just bred from this mother plant. You take every seed, you pop them, germinate them, feed them all the same, water, nutrients, sunlight, everything. All 100 come out differently. How do you choose? Do you choose by the smell, the profile, the terpene, the expression, or do you choose by the high, the effect that you're getting? A lot of people, the first appeal is the bag appeal. Then it's the smell appeal. So how do you really choose from 100 different plants or seedlings that are all expressed differently? Because even though they're getting the same regimen clear across the board, everyone's going to express differently. Even if I got same clones next to each other, they're still going to express a little differently. So I can't quite crop steer my plant to continue to produce the same every time. Even though I can come close, I can keep the same regiments. But even if I come off or steer off just a little bit, it's going to change the effect.
It's going to fluctuate a bit. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's just the reality of biology. That's okay. You can accept that. I can accept that.
I like to pick them by eeny, meeny, miny, mo, usually. But
Speaking of that, I'm gonna have to do that with some of your genetics. You sent me a pile of shit.
Woo! 9 packs. I wasn't expecting 9.
3 years. I don't know. Wow. Cool.
Very blessed for sure.
Very appreciative.
So for all of you that don't really follow us on YouTube or Instagram, Smiley kept telling us he was going to send us a care package. Okay, well, you figure, homie, he's going to send you a couple pack of seeds. Oh, it was like 9 packs of seeds, tons of slaps. Like, that's a care package.
no, I appreciate you guys coming and hanging out and talking organics and shit. And I don't know, just whatever. I wanted you to have some of my seeds. So.
I do agree, though, that a lot of the stressing of the plant can and will bring out an extra terpenes production there. All overall, I've always been, outside of like organics, been an advocate of not supporting my plants. I like to let them flop. Almost, I don't support them until they need be or they have buds right, to about there. I know she's about ready to snap because I've always noticed great things happening from that stress in the plant, and a lot of people argue about that, the stress during flower, if it's beneficial or not. Late flower, I believe it's very beneficial to let them ladies stress. Is it, stress as far as starving the plant as far as nutrients? I don't know about that, but natural environmental stresses, plant terpenes, like I was saying, terpenes or pressures or gases, there's things that, can be, your plant's going to try to outdo certain things. And if smell, I've grown many strains side by side, and people, doesn't things taste the same? No, not unless you're using some like terrible fucking, artificial nutrients. What are you using? Fucking what was the one back in the day that ended put all the lemon in there? Damn, what was it? Yeah, if you add a bunch of inputs in there, you can maybe get your plants to taste a tiny bit similar. But what I've always noted from growing plants side by side with different fucking flavor profiles is I think they honestly work against each other. The one next to it wants to be louder than the one right next to it. I mean, it is a living beast. And like anything else, you want to be the handsomest guy in the room. You know what I mean? You want to be, you know, I don't think plants are any different. And you put a pretty girl in there next to it, she wants to smell not better than that girl. And I think them two plants are going to fight against each other to make their flavor profiles very individual, not blended together like a lot of people would assume.
Well, let me
But
back.
you gotta remember too, like, so even in the wine industry, I mean, they grow those same vines year after year, right? But yet they're still considered quote unquote better seasons than other seasons, and it's all dependent on the weather, you know, and the
The
environment.
moisture content, the rain, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that those plants are the same plants, they're just expressing a different fruit, you know, just like our flower is considered like a fruit there, right? They're going to express a different fruit based on their environment. It's a known, I mean, it's been known, like it shouldn't, when you really think about it, it's like, oh, that makes fucking sense, you know, why they have good seasons and bad seasons in wine. I'm not even a wine.
It's scientifically proven, and they've taken it right down to flavonoid, terpenoid profiles, anthocyanins. All that's been science studied to the nth degree under microbiology.
Well, yeah, there's big money in studying all the grapes and shit. That's why I like you. I like looking into some of the agricultural stuff because there's a lot more studies that are done, and maybe it doesn't directly translate, but some of it kind of can stimulate some ideas and some things, you know, and that's how new shit gets discovered and thought about.
Tools to have up here. That's what I would say.
Well, and a lot of people, oh, cannabis isn't agricultural crop. What the fuck are you talking about? It is an agricultural crop.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So the research for all these other crops does have some application to cannabis. So all this research that we're doing in these other fields of tomatoes, peppers, fucking all these different agricultural crops, even apple trees, for example. There's so much research out there about the shit we're talking about that you can take that research and apply it to your cannabis plants. And that's where a lot of us, such as John Kemp, Matthew Powers, James White, Dr. Elaine Ingham, has taken all that information and applied it to cannabis. And that's how we're coming up with a lot of this information that we're discussing. And people don't get that sometimes.
And let's not forget, a lot of the really good background innovators came from and returned to and are part of the cannabis community. I came on to all this nutrient density and all this stuff and got really deep into this field on a deep, deep level. It all came from the cannabis community. I stumbled across this stuff on a forum and had a thirst for learning, and I learned more and more. And now, you know, now it's an integrated part of my life. It's what I'm going to be doing for a living. Like, it's awesome, man. It's exciting. And there's so much groundbreaking science coming. Like, there is no limit to like pieces of the field you can be a part of. And man, it's just fun.
So
that's got me thinking too. Like I was thinking about that, Carlton, with the nutrient density. Like, so now tomatoes, for example, I have some heirloom Roma tomatoes. There's bazillion fucking different tomatoes you can pick, right? But there's this one, San Marzanos, that are like known for being really great for pasta and really great Romas, right? So, forgot where I was going with that. The fucking selection. Oh no, these guys, they know, like in an agricultural sense, like a greenhouse and shit. Like they'll know the fucking germination rates of those, like a percentage. They'll know, like, based on how well they emerge, like how much they should produce, and like they've studied that fucking strain like to the nth degree. Like they know all kinds of shit about those plants that it's like you start looking into it and you're like, holy fuck, man! Like they study, like in corn, for example, they know if it's a week late on emergence from the soil, like popping out of the soil, like they know how much of a less yield that's going to be at the end of the season. Like they can calculate that to a range. Like
that's exactly what brought me across critical points of influence, was exactly what you're talking about. And John Kemp was talking specifically about corn because it's a simple, easy one to understand, right? the concept basically is everything you do that stresses a plant from germination to harvest limits its yield potential and its genetic expression. So this is epigenetics at its core, right? So when you germinate, you have to get at the right depth. You have to be at the right temperature. You have the right biology present, the right moisture content, the right nutrient profile available. You want to start with the quality seed that's loaded with its own innate nutrients built into that seed. Start with that. Awesome.
So
let me
there's
finish.
okay.
Let me finish. Okay, awesome. We got to start. We got to seed up and running. Now we got enough to get us going, right? But now we got that 9 to 12 day window. That affects whether or not it will develop, how many ears it could potentially develop, right? Anywhere from 1 or none on out to 8 genetic potential ears, right? And then as we go out to day 18 to 21, we get into how many rows of kernels each ear will have. And then at day 38 to 42, we have how many kernels on each row will be on. So you see, as we go down the timeline, we reduce the effect we can have on yield by increasing nutrient availability and maximizing the environment.
Okay. So back to research. And the latest research, and this is why none of us call ourselves master growers, because none of us are a fucking master. And the ones that call yourself a master grower, you're an idiot, because you are not a master. Because if you say you can never learn anything more than what you've already learned, you're a complete moron, okay? Because the latest research from James White just came out not too long ago. And it's not just about the rise of Faggy cycle and plants consuming bacteria and fungi, but it's now plants consume algae and protozoa, as well as bacteria and fungi. So plants are consuming more of the soil food web than we had originally thought of and understood. And now more and more information is fucking coming out about what's happening down there around the rise of the Faggy cycle. So for all you that say you know everything about the plant, I bet you didn't know fucking that. So you just learned something new today if you hadn't known that. Yes, that is a great podcast right there. And that is the one I am talking about, where he actually talks about what they have recently found besides bacteria and fungi that the plants are consuming and uptaking.
Yeah, it's interesting that whole concept of like the roots consuming the bacteria and just the discovery of that is like a game changer. And the idea that just a touch of, like a salt nitrogen source totally shuts that cycle down is kind of an eye opener too, and it makes you think like, getting back to like a natural cycle of how the plant is going to try to operate with consuming that type of biology to its food source, and just allowing that, like trying to focus on providing a soil food web that's going to be able to cycle the nutrients that the plant needs and be able to be consumed in that form that the plant can take in its nutrients that way. You know what I mean? I think it's a game changer on how the plant's going to express, because it's part of that environment like we were talking.
What are you talking about?
It has to be part of how the plant expresses its genetics. It absolutely has to be.
I'm Harley Smith from NPK University, and plants don't eat biology. I'm Dr. James or Bruce Bugsby. What are you talking about? Plants don't consume biology. According to them, that don't happen. So watch who you're listening to in this scientific field.
Well, this is definitely cutting edge. I mean, they discovered this with like new dyes or something that they were, I think, even just fucking around with it, and kind of were like, holy shit, like they were just discovering that these cells were inside the roots, like it was pretty sure it was a dye that was the determiner on that. But if they've expanded that to the bigger life forms like protozoa and stuff, that's pretty interesting too. Like,
yeah, protozoa as well, and I forget what else, but it was like
algae.
Yeah, basically going, look, big picture, we think they absorb all life forms and use them just like humans. They're basically carnivorous as well. They just can't eat a cow. They have to eat something smaller, right?
Huh, I seen a thing how there's like there's a caterpillar, I think, or of some type. It would eat algae and fucking be able to move the photosynthesis cells up into its body.
Yes, I saw that too.
It like started utilizing the photosynthesis cells of the fucking algae that it consumed.
Well, let's stop on
It
that.
could actually, yeah, it was like an energy source for the thing constantly.
Let's stop on that for a
Wow,
minute.
dude.
Let's relate that to humans for a minute. Think about that, because we have photonic cells too. All of our cells recognize light energies around us. We can dramatically affect our energy and our hormones and everything with our light interaction. UV light early in the morning helps stimulate proper cortisol production early in the day and reduce it late in the day. It reduces our stress. It changes our fat. It changes our vitamin D consumption. It changes our glutathione. On down the list, antioxidants, it affects the whole system. So same concept goes in humans, plants, and animals, and probably applies to bacteria, fungi, protozoa. Light is another change in the environment, and we all recognize it. We all are able to sense it. We sense it and affect it and react to it different ways. The concept applies.
So when you're talking light, let's talk frequency, because everything's frequency, sound, light, everything. Plants give off frequencies. Plants will communicate both above ground through chemical or frequencies, letting other plants know that they're being attacked by pest or pathogens. Same thing in the root zone. Bees and plants that produce flower pollen, they give off a certain, frequency signal, and have a negatively charged. You seen what I sent you, right? Yes. So when the bees come around, they're a positive charge. And it's weird because if the plant doesn't have pollen, the bee can detect it by the frequency and the charge that it's giving off. So the bee will know to go to another flower site to get pollen. So we need to understand that plants are communicating with animals, such as those cows you were talking about having better calcium in their grass on the other side of the fence. They can detect that shit. We can, but we're not tuned into it.
Yes, we can, and flavor is a great way for us to access part of that sense system. And let me just relate, because we're talking about frequencies, and this relates on multiple spectrums. You talked about the honeybees and how they respond to charge, right? They also respond to how much sugar's in a flower. I wonder if that relates to charge, because a honeybee will not visit a flower that is less than 7 bricks. They won't even stop at that flower and look at it for nectar. They'll skip it and go on to another flower. Yep. So, and while we're at it, let's just talk about more frequency related stuff. They've discovered that a bumblebee operates about 600 hertz. And scientists for a long time couldn't figure out why a bumblebee could fly due to its weight to wing ratio and the speed at the wings, like the physics didn't work. But what they found is that resonance is part of how they fly. And there was a scientist guy who built a flying machine out of insect wings back in the 40s or 50s or something. So it all ties in, multiple layers, and plants communicate by scent, by frequency, by radiation, by all sorts of things, including sound. So it's multispectral tied in.
Oh, there's a comment in the chat about cows becoming a pollution, and that is inaccurate and mistaken comment, because cows are actually helped to regenerate agriculture and are being used to get the manure spread across farmlands to get the biology started. And it's not that they're a pollutant or cause methane gas problems. No, don't listen to the nonsense.
Well, there's two different parts of this equation. There's feedstock lots, which, yes, where they will produce more methane than they sequester carbon. And then there's regenerative agriculture where all those constituents are spread out across the land in a distributed way that the biology can absorb and sequester that carbon and actually accelerates the carbon sequestration cycle. So 2 different models. Don't be fooled by bullshit.
That's a whole different. We could go into a whole nother show on that whole subject right there. To be honest, plants. Well, just again, skipping the whole eating meat cycle there. I mean, it's debatable for overwatering the amount of water that goes into your hamburger to the amount of energy it takes to produce the plant part of the food that the animal eats, the water, the whole process it takes to keep the cattle alive for.
Well, we as humans make idiotic choices. Hey, I'm going to be a vegan and not eat meat, not realizing meat is the best source of nutrient value than most plants and fruits, especially when it comes to different good fats and amino acids. These are complex type minerals that we need that we don't get when we are a vegan. And that's where a lot of people don't understand that. And when they are vegans for a long time, they see a deterioration in their health over time because they're not getting those nutrients that they need. And it's already been factually proven this to be true. And yet people still refute the evidence. But
I watched a thing last night that it said something along the lines of during the evolution of man there, them eating more bigger animals that were more nutritionally dense and mineral dense, that it actually progressed in the human brain. You know what I mean? The overall evolution of man from just eating, dinosaurs and shit like that were further along the chain.
Let me unpack that.
Cooking food really accelerated that.
Let me unpack that for you for a second, because we're actually getting ready to cut right into that deep. I've had Brad Lauber on. He's a regenerative farmer out in Nebraska. He's working on food label, where the food label is testing the product and carrying the product testing right to the label. So you can go in the store and see what the actual, not what the label says, but what's actually in the package. The next level of that is this nutrient density testing. And where that's going is with your phone, when you walk in the store, you can scan the fruit and see what the nutrient density is on the spot. The reason for that is because the difference when they did testing across these 10 crops that they've actually developed profiles on is the difference, like, for example, between carrots, it's not 2 or 3x, it's 5x, 10x, 20x, 40x difference in nutrition. We're talking about 40 carrots to equivalent the calcium in 1 carrot between 2 different sources, 2 different soils. So that's the level of granularity and quality we're going to be able to go to, and it's going to be in the user's hands. And I think the really cool thing is, in addition to how that'll affect our food and our genetics and how we can affect our immunity and health and nutrient density, it also, I think, long-term is going to provide us some really cool opportunities in the cannabis world for what it is spectral analysis. You shoot a light at something, it's a YAG doped laser, and the reflection that comes back is devoid in a certain spectrum, and that's the spectrum that you're reading that material is emitting, okay, or vice versa, right? But it's what's used to look at stars and determine what stars are made up of in solar systems millions of light years away. So why can't you do it inches away on any object on Earth? Well, you can, and now the technology is coming out for it.
I can't wait for something like that. You know why? Do you know why I can't wait for something like that, brother?
Yeah, lots of reasons. But go ahead.
I'm going to tell you the obvious right there, at least in my
nutrient density.
Goodbye, doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Goodbye, doctor.
Exactly.
To me, hold on, let me go.
Yep.
I think that's one of the biggest problems in the medical industry is they just first of all, just try this. Take this pill, take this pill, take this pill. I've never understood why they didn't point that fucking laser at me and go, okay, your neutral density is wow, jack shit, dude. Fucking go home, eat some salads, take some vitamins. You need
Eagle.
a particular fucking mineral. You know what I mean? Because at that point, that laser is gonna eliminate that doctor. You're gonna eliminate so much sickness when they take you for what's wrong with you and what you're deficient in versus throwing just covers at us. So
That's why they say doctors. That's why they say doctors have a practice. They're practicing medicine. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. It's called a practice for a reason. Okay. Most of these doctors are not educated in these industries to understand health and nutrition. They're taught a certain way to look at things. And that's why they're practicing. Oh, well, you have these symptoms, so we're going to try to treat you for this. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, we're going to try to treat you for this. It's a practice for a reason.
But let's back.
Hey, Carl, I just want to say, can I get just call dibs on like the Michigan rep for that if that ever becomes a thing?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
we can talk.
I just want to say, I think I could sell a lot of those.
We should talk off because there's lots to talk about. But back to that point about what you're talking about. I just released a video not too long ago talking about that the marriage of the three things that are coming here, and like maybe you should go check it out because it's maybe a 20-minute video. It's called Regenerative Agriculture 3.0 or something like that. But it's talking basically about how we have nutrient density testing in the power of our hands, right in our grasp, plant sap analysis right in our grasp. And that, by the way, is rolling out in the hands of the farmer and the user next. That's coming out as part of Regenerative Agriculture 3.0. Then on top of that, hold on. On top of that, we've got tremendous technology explosion. We can do anything ourselves now. We can write our own technology, broadcast our own shit. And then we have medicine 3.0 blowing up, where they're starting to tune nutrition right down to the person, especially as they're dealing with elderly people and hormone balance and nutrition. So I think you put the three of those together, in the next 5 years, we're probably going to have it all in our hands.
None of that's going to matter. And here's why. Until you change the farmers getting away from fucking conventional farming to a regenerative ag to have a better nutrient density, that's never going to change the problems we have. And we had a problem when we started after World War II using chemical fertilizers on our soils. And from that point on, our nutrient density in our food has gone down tremendously because of the soils are no longer holding the nutrients that the plants need and to take up. So if you go back to even 1940s when farmers were growing hemp and feeding hemp to the cows, back to the cows, the meat that the farmers were eating were so full of the omega-3s from hemp and the CBD that they were getting it consuming the meat. And this goes back to when produce actually had nutrient density. The meats that we were eating at the time had a lot of density to it. Now that everything's changed and we're in this fucked up cycle of using this conventional farming method, none of the meat has the nutrient density. The food doesn't have the nutrient density. Now we are applying it to our cannabis plants like idiots. Hey, let's do conventional farming methods for cannabis. We're not getting the cannabinoid profiles out of our plants. We're not getting those expressions. We can use this meter reader and it will help see that, which will be the benefit of people being able to recognize, oh, this is not as dense as I thought. But until we change the mentality of the farmer and the cannabis cultivator that wants to grow conventional, we're not going to see much advancements or improvements until that changes.
And so that's why you should go check out my Comrades and Farms episode with Dan Kittredge, because we talk specifically about how that process is completely hackable and how it regenerates human health, human nutrition, soil health, environment. It hacks all the corporate systems, and all those pieces flow in to make a better planet for everyone. So And I don't give a shit. Like if you watch it for my channel, watch it for your own health, watch it for your friends and family. And you don't got to watch my shit. Go watch it on Dan Kittredge's channel. Go listen to Advancing Eco Agriculture. I don't care where you get it. Go get good science information and take it home, because you can put it to actionable things you can do for your own health, and better yet, for your longevity and your happiness later in life. Watch my dad die the last year and a half with a broken back and osteoporosis, and he didn't have to. So think about that.
I hear that, bro. It's really sorry to hear that. We have hit that mark. I want to say cheers to you, Carlton, for a few things you've said this evening. And it really echoes the way I feel about this plant, to be honest with you. This plant is something special to me, but through the cultivation of this plant, I have seen all kinds of people change for the better. Through this process, I mean, we may throw those seeds, those plants in the dirt for different reasons. But as we learn to grow, and as again, maybe selfishly, we indulge in this knowledge to make better plants, undoubtedly, we produce better people. And that is 100%, we are cultivating ourselves, our souls in this process as well. And the more that I dig into the soil, I'm realizing, and I'm not the smart, not, I'm learning a ton of shit from you guys through this process. But as I get in deeper into the soil, I see a more spiritual connection with us and the plants. And you're absolutely right. Through the forums, the more you dive deeper into this stuff, it takes you into crazy wormholes, but they better us in so many different ways. And I appreciate you for tipping your hat, because I believe through this process, through the cultivation process, can become a lot of things. I see rehabilitation. I see people, getting off of drugs. Even people coming from incarceration, you know what I mean? Through the helping out through farms and a lot like that, finding themselves and then, bettering themselves in a lot of ways. So this is, it's, and through people like yourselves, we're learning a lot. I have learned a lot. I continue to learn a lot from you three. I do. I appreciate you guys doing this week after week and making this knowledge. So, like you said, like Carlton, I've lost family through this, and it sucks. If it can be 100% avoided, we should be helping and putting that knowledge out there. And thank you for putting your time into this, because if it can help just that one person, you've succeeded. You know what I mean? With that being said, you guys, would you like to say your goodbyes? Because I just did mine. I appreciate you guys, man. I say it every time, but more than you know, I got shit tons of respect for you guys. And that's comes from the heart. It really does. So the rest of this is your guys' mess. Say goodbye, brothers. Say goodbye.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody in chat that's coming to watch and hang out with us, and continuing to put your information in the chat as well as the panelists, because you guys engaging in chat makes a big difference to a lot of people, because there's other conversations that people are talking about that we may not be talking about right here on the panel, and people need to hear that information. So thank you for being a part of the chat and helping out as well.
Where can they find you, Mr. Medically Fit?
You can find me at my mama's house. No. You can find me on Instagram or YouTube. Those are the two places you could really find me.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys coming on and having this conversation. It's been real cool. Definitely learned a lot from everybody on the panel too. And you can follow me on Smileys_garden Instagram, or on YouTube, or Smileys.angels on Instagram. There's a couple of different ways. So yeah, thanks again, Eagle. For sure, man.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, you can find me on the Pharmacy Seas Network YouTube channel. What else? I'm on Truth Refugee Media. That's not really live yet, but that'll be coming on soon. I'm also on Instagram at Reboot Agriculture. I'm on Twitter as Reboot Agricult One or something like that. I throw little clips up about regenerative ag and all that kind of stuff. If you want to just kind of like keep your eye a little tuned on it, I put up a little bunch of little short stuff along those lines. And that way you don't have to like go deep if you don't want. But anyway, yeah, I love the conversation here, gentlemen. Thank you for everything. I just want to back up what MedFit said about thank you to everybody in chat. That you're helping people a lot more than you know. I know I've done a lot of that chat stuff, and just those little links and those little tidbits of information, boy, they help. So, and Eagle, thanks for giving us a place to do this and spreading that message. I appreciate every one of you guys. You all have authenticity and integrity, and that just means so much. Cheers, gentlemen.
That being said, I want to say thank you to Smiley again, too. You fucking continue to hang out. I can be one of the most difficult motherfuckers, and I'm told that by everybody that seems to love me. They're like, you're a rough motherfucker, but you're good by book. But you continue to hang out, brother, and I'm very grateful for that. You've been here from the beginning, and you continue to help push this thing along. I do. I love you, brother. Thank you more than you know.
Hey, as Subcool would say, we know.
Yeah. Overgrow the nations, right?
Yes, overgrow.
Grow and overthrow.
That being said, don't forget to do something nice for somebody. Random acts, kindness do save lives. And with that being said, we will see you in 2 weeks at 8 o'clock. Have a good one. Peace. I gotta find the end button. Hold on, guys. Weird ending. Weird.
Cheers, everybody.